The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello and welcome to Art of War Vanilla Edition. I'm your host this time, Blake Law, and we are very glad you're able to join us. Now, what is the show? You all know what this show is. This is Art of War. This is the hallmark of all 40K shows. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be interviewing our guest, who you may already know who it is because I'm hosting this show. But we're going to be getting to know his play style. We're going to be getting to know his list and kind of where he sits in the 40K and how he got to where he is today. Now, our guest today is going to be someone that you all know and love. He has won so many events. He's won everything under the freaking sun. He's won the Nova Open. He's won Adepticon. He was a child when he won Adepticon, actually. Go look it up. And he has won just a whole slew of things, including the ITC. I, of course, am talking about the Tom Brady of Warhammer 40K, Mr. Nick Nanavati.
Hey, Blake, how you doing? Good to have you back on the show.
Dude, I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. Before we get started, Nick, I do want to say one thing. For those interested, make sure to check out the part 2 of this podcast available to Patreons at the Art of War Patreon. Go check it out. Go subscribe. Go look at all the good content and all the previous episodes because there's a whole bunch of them and they're a treasure trove, including mine, Unbroken. Go look it up too. Nick, what do you got for me today?
I got to let them know that you also have started your own network. So where can they go to find your stuff?
Oh, yeah. You can go check me out at Blake Law Studios. I have a Patreon up. Go check out Spotify or wherever you get download your podcast. We actually have a podcast called Fluffy Dog 40K. It's a lore podcast. It's me and Brad Chester. Go and check it out. All the content's free. So just go look at it, listen, and give us a like. Now, Nick, you've been involved in the 40K community for a very, very long time. You were, 16 when you got into the competitive scene. So give us a little bit of your background, kind of where you started, where this journey has taken you, and kind of what has led you to this list. We're going to be talking about Genestealer cults today, as you all kind of have figured out at this point. But give us your background leading up to this year when we're playing 10th edition Genestealer cult.
Yeah, so long story short, I'm from New Jersey. I started playing Warhammer when I was 10. I started playing at my local game store, which unfortunately has closed down since back then, but that's a special place in my heart, the only game in town. And basically, I just kind of fell in love with Warhammer as a community through my local game store. And I started competing, and I was terrible at Warhammer. But through sheer perseverance and love for the hobby, I just got better and better over time. Kept going to more and more tournaments. And, I was young. I was like 13, 14, mostly doing this on the goodwill of my parents. So, I was going to local RTTs, which were few and far between. Back then, it was one every 3 months, and that's what you got. So I would go to those, and I would get my ass kicked. And eventually I got better and I would start winning those, and then I'd feel really good, and I started going to GTs and not do super well there, but eventually got better there. And enough of trial and error through it all, I started to compete on the biggest scene at the time. So I went to Adepticon in 2012 and I won that.
I was there.
Yeah, Blake was there. Blake, you were there.
I was there. I was an adult.
Did you win?
I almost made the top cut. I lost the last second to Black Blowfly, actually, in the last round. I think he made top 16 and I didn't. So it was a tough loss for me.
Oh, that's a name you haven't heard in a while.
I know. That's why I brought it up.
Seriously.
I want to imagine a young, sad Nick losing, like a 14-year-old Nick at the game store, just completely distraught losing at an RTT.
I was awful. I mean, not awful, but I'm not proud of how I was as a 14-year-old, but how many adults are proud of how they were when they were 14? I don't think many.
That's probably true, actually. What was your faction back then? What got you into the game? What was the army that you looked at and said, this is it?
Oh, I hate that you asked me this question, Blake.
Is it Tau?
So the first thing I ever bought was Space Marine Scouts. Oh. But I would hardly call myself a Marine player. Back in that day, the starter set was Battle for McCrack, so I quickly got that. And that had Space Marines and Tyranids. And I was really, Tyranids are so cool. They're Tyranids. But for whatever reason, I was unable to successfully collect a Tyranid army. And I had a little bit of army ADD even back then, which kind of makes sense for how I got into where I am now. I bought a box of Necrons. I had struggled to build the Necrons, so those were inaccessible to me. I'm still bad at building models. And then somehow I landed on Tau. And I hate Tau. I really hate Tau. But Tau were my first army that I really properly collected. And I kept the whole army in this skateboard box that I had from some point. And I had a towel. That was what I used instead of foam. And then all the crisis suits, they have the little spindly ankles They all broke. They all snapped right at the angle. So I just put the crisis suit face down on the table, no base, no nothing, and that was my Tau army.
You know what's funny? That's probably more care than you give to models these days.
I love my models.
You're like it's like you used a towel back then. Now you probably just like put them in your hands and carry them to a hall.
Why are you hating, Blake? You should. This is about me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
This is about you. This is about your journey as a person and how you became less careful with models over time.
So in this epic tale, I eventually started winning tournaments, and then I got like internationally recognized as I qualified for Team America after winning Adepticon 2012. And that's when I really fell in love with the super competitive side of the hobby and was like, I'm going to try to go as far as I can. And through my ventures and journeys, I won the ITC in 2018. Then I made it my job. I went pro Warhammer in 2018 as well, right after I won ITC. And then in 2020, we started Art of War, and it's been awesome. Life's been great.
Tell me, back then when you first started the hobby, who would you say your biggest mentors and like people who kind of got you like further in the game? Because as you went to Adepticon, you weren't probably where you are even now. Who were the people who kind of helped get you there?
That's a great question. So, like my local heroes, honestly, like there's this guy, Frankie Sutherland, this other guy, Mike Soletto. I'm still like in touch with them from here and there, and they're all moved on now. But these are like people who, like Frankie, managed my game store that I worked at, or not that I worked at, that I played at. Mike worked there, and they were just older. I was like a kid, and they played Warhammer, and they were like, Frankie wasn't even very good. He was like very into the hobby side, but he was really passionate about it, and you could tell. And he like kind of mentored me on that stuff. And then Mike was just like a friend, and that like helped me make connections like that. And then Mike had a mind for the competitive side. We were all kind of terrible back then, but he was better at it, and he helped me like try to get better and taught me the mindsets to get better and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you kind of built a community up there with Beast Coast, and you kind of started collecting people, I feel like, kind of along the eastern seaboard there.
Yeah, definitely. As like I grew the scene as I grew up as a kid, like, between 14 and 18, I would say the scene really took off, and we started like forming little clubs. The Warhammer scene grew over time. It still is growing. So back then we went from having RTTs every 3 months to like RTTs every single month as a huge step forward. And like we had a club to support it, and it like supported itself. And like a lot of them got better. We pushed each other to get better. One of them is actually Jack Harpster, one of our Art of War coaches. He played at Saga, the game store I mentioned earlier. I played him in his first ever RTT game. He had like Chaos Space Marines, and I had Tyranids, and I surrounded his Rhino so none of his guys could get out. And he was like, oh my God. And now look at Jack. He's a monster. He's winning ITC.
Yeah, Jack's a monster now, that's for sure. He's really taken steps since joining Art of War, actually. So you had all these people up there. I mean, you had Jack. You helped develop Jack, I'm sure, and Jack kind of helped sharpen you on that end. Where did you kind of go? Yeah. When did you? So you kind of had this play style. Was it always the same, or did you start to develop the play style you have? And kind of give us a rundown of what your play style actually is.
Yeah, I definitely had to find it. I've tried all kinds of things in 40K, not knowing. I would define myself as a very defensive, reactive player. I like to outplay people in the movement phase of the game. And I'm not necessarily talking about those little combat pile-in tricks. Those are fine. But I'm talking about thinking of 40K as if it's like a chess game, and then where you put your models in this turn, and then how that impacts the next turn, and what is possible throughout the game. I try to beat you at that level. And that's where I really find enjoyment. So armies that allow me to play, like Demons and Eldar, Genestealer Cult, they have a lot of movement, and they have a lot of ability to position themselves and react effectively to how the enemy is engaging with the battlefield. I really like those factions. Drukhari similarly, all through 9th edition and 8th edition, I play these factions, and I play pretty much everything by nature of my job, but these are the factions I definitely have an affinity for. And how I developed it is basically just trying everything until I kind of jived with something, and then keep on doing it.
There was an example, because I think that when someone doesn't know the game very well, and you say something like, I like to control the movement phase, I feel like that's kind of hard for people to conceptualize. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was when I actually played Nick at an event. He was playing Genestealer Cult, and I was playing my Knights bogus Imperial Army at the time. And what Nick did turn one is he actually took all of his Genestealer Cult bikes, pushed them forward, and made this bizarre formation that basically encompassed the entire half of the board and kept it to where I couldn't do anything for an entire turn. And I think that's kind of one of the many multitude of tricks he's talking about when he talks about actually going out, controlling the movement phase, and kind of this controlling the tempo of the game defensively.
Yeah, that's a great example. And just to kind of remove some of the mystique around it, all I really did in that scenario was I had like these these three different units of jackals. And they're 4 bikes each, so like 48 points back in the day. These are just my trash. This is just the units I'm okay losing. And they're meant to be lost to do stuff like this. So they scout, and I basically drove them all forward, scouted whatever 9 inches or something forward, and then moved 12 inches straight forward, and they're right in front of Blake's Knights. And obviously these rinky-dink bikes aren't going to do anything to Blake's Knights, but they're standing right in front of Blake's Knights army, and they're doing so in ways that are going to prevent Blake from taking his Knights and moving up the table and getting better line of sight angles. So now I know where Blake's Knights can go because I've controlled where they could go. And now I know where his Knights, how far up the table they're going to be. I can like check their line of sight. I could bend over, and check the table. And then I can move my models that I actually care about, not the bikes, to all the spots where they can't be shot. And that worked great.
I think what's interesting about the way you play the game is when you stop and think about 40K, there's five turns, right? So if you're able to take the movement phase and every single time you're able to dictate where I go, that's 20% of the game that you're able to predict and you're able to set your own plan towards, So every time you do that, you just increase your odds of knowing how the game's going to go, which I think is pretty cool.
And you know what else is cool, Blake? A lot of it is tied. It's already telegraphed to you. I don't have to predict that much, It's not like I'm Houdini out here. It's really you can really look at the tactical objective cards in 10th edition, and you can read the primary mission and know what your opponent has to do. They have to hold a certain amount of objectives to score primary healthily. The deck has a lot of different cards in it, but aside from bring it down and assassinate, they pretty much all have to deal with going to the middle of the board or going to the opponent's side of the board and doing an action or standing somewhere. So he's going to be coming forward up the table. And if I can make that harder, or if I can disrupt that, or even predict where it's going to go based on like behind enemy lines or the objective right here, then I can really know where they're going to be and move around accordingly.
So you feel like 10th edition kind of gave that more of a...
I think it made it harder, actually. In 9th edition, you would pick 3 secondaries and the primary would just be set. So you had a very clear game plan that your opponent and yourself were trying to execute, which I prefer 10th edition. It makes it a lot more play on the fly and more kind of like 40K should be, where it's not so easily predictable. But in 9th edition, it was easily predictable, and that made it very easy to plan these things.
Speaking of 10th edition, do you feel like you had to make any adjustments as a player going into the new edition? Was there anything that changed as you kind of went from 9th to 10th?
You always do. The editions are always like a little bit of a learning curve. The first couple games are really awkward, but after that, you kind of get your legs out from under you. Now I feel fairly comfortable with it. Not like a master, but fairly comfortable. I would say some interesting nuances from 9th to 10th that I had to learn stylistically is just the tempo and the reserves, like things like rapid ingress. Everybody now goes back in reserve, shows up 3 inches away. That's a lot more common amongst factions. That's doing stuff in your opponent's turn, like Overwatch. This is all some stuff you just have to get used to. And with that, it's a lot harder to just know stuff is going to happen and know things are going to work a certain way. So you have to account for a level of chaos in your plans.
Right. That's interesting because I feel like that's kind of the way some of the previous editions were, and we kind of went more towards that. What's going to happen. You can make a game plan before the game and kind of stick to it in like late 8th, early 9th kind of stuff. So I kind of like that. I agree. It makes the game a little bit different than what it was.
Yeah, I agree. It's more fun this way, at least for me.
Are there any things going into 10th edition that you really just feel like are things you as a player have to do every time you go in, as far as like choosing what secondaries you're playing and things like that?
So it's a good question as well. I don't really like to go in with a set game plan necessarily. I have things that I've kind of developed over time with lists that this is just like what I do. It typically works for me. Those are like my moves out of my playbook. But generally speaking, everything's kind of evaluated at the table. So a great example is like if I'm playing an army that is typically capable of achieving secondaries, I've built a lot of fast units in, and I've, capabilities of deep striking and just scoring points like that. So if I'm playing against a lot of armies, I'm built to do tactical, since they don't necessarily give things up like bring it down and assassinate or whatever. But then I might go up against and play Custodes, and they don't really have backfield screens. All their stuff needs to push in the middle of the table, so their backfield is really open for behind enemy lines and deploy teleport homers. Wombo combo for 9 points a turn for the entire game. So if I can pull that off against them, I'm going to remember that and keep that to my back pocket. So I'm basically just going to try to look at your game plan and my game plan and compare the two and try to figure out what I can make work around yours that you can't really stop.
Right. So kind of similar to previous editions where there's certain factions where you go, aha, I'm taking Bring It Down versus Knights, or I'm taking, behind enemy lines versus small elite unit kind of army. Yeah, that makes sense. So you kind of cater towards what you play, and you just got to get the reps to know that's what you want to take on it.
Reps definitely make up a lot of it. I would also suggest that, like in 10th more so than any other edition, there's like I said, that element of chaos. So you have to just kind of be ready for anything and play as though you are ready for anything. So I like to just throw units up into reserve without knowing it. And because the missions are so wild and the game is so new, there's a lot of outside the box ways you can solve problems. So just because there is conventional and air quotes wisdom starting to form on the internet does not make it the only way or the right way at all.
Oh, for sure. Especially with Index Hammer. I feel like there's this whole bunch of random things you can do right now that you maybe couldn't do as the book came out and things like that. So the possibilities are pretty open for almost any faction. And I think you're seeing a lot of that with some of the kind of random armies that are winning at some of these smaller GTs and things like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there for different armies to do well right now. I think there's clear winners, like Eldar are dominating, Custodes are doing well, GSC are doing well, but there's a lot of things like Chaos Space Marines just did really well this week, and I don't think anyone's been talking about them.
Oh, they're sweet, man. They got some good combos, definitely. Some pretty interesting things you can do with them.
And they can take Fate Weaver.
Oh, they can take Fate Weaver. That's all right. I'm curious to see this coming up weekend. We have the ATC coming, and it's probably one of the larger events coming into 10th as far as it's like, people who are there that are big names on the game. And I'm curious to see how it shakes out given that format, given that you're not going to see just all the meta armies played because you have to have 5 different armies on each team. So I think that's going to be an interesting time, actually.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, actually, because by the time this episode releases, the ITC have already happened. So we'll have some more data on that. But looking at it right now from when we are recording, my team and I, Art of War, we were just looking at the different teams that we were concerned about or worried for or need to prepare for. And they all have Eldar, Custodes, some sort of Space Marine, and GSC. Every single one for the most part. There's a couple exceptions. I know like Mark Perry's team is a big threat and they do not follow this mold. But for the large part, they follow that. And I think it's really interesting that so many teams have either kind of come together on this team composition or they're just identifying these the best armies.
What's funny is you didn't pick my team, Nick, which I found very disheartening.
Blake, I used to be on your team, Team Beast Coast. Okay, so until you can pick up the slack, I don't need to do it for you.
To say we don't have GSC, so I feel disrespected. So when we play, I'm playing you, and I'm gonna knock you down.
That we're playing. There will be a duel. We're not just playing a Warhammer match. We're going to do a contest of 3 different sports.
We are, and we'll get into that later. We're going to talk about what the other 2 sports are and what the bet is, but that's an off-air thing. So we'll touch on that shortly.
It's also in part 2.
That's something with the spicy secrets of part 2, what our bet is and what the triathlon is going to actually be. So we all know I'm going to win the 40K game, so it'll have to be something really strong for Nick on the other 2. So
yodeling.
Yodel. Ooh, you are a great yodeler. So tell me a little bit about where you've been so far on this event. I know y'all been doing just an absolute ton of content. Y'all have been prepping for the WTC because basically your entire Art of War team is on the Team USA. You've been prepping for ATC. You've been just releasing bukus, pre-recorded content for 10th edition. You've been doing on-the-spot weekly strategy updates, all this stuff in the War Room. Tell me a little bit about where you are right now in the edition, what you're excited about, and kind of where you see it all going.
Yeah, great question. So actually, I'm not on Team America. Neither is Richard Ziegler. So John, Jack, and Anthony are. Quentin's going as a coach role, but they're going as independent operatives for Team America. So just want to clarify that. But additionally, I'm kind of starving for games out here. Right, this edition change is super exciting for me. I had my streamathon of content, and I'm good. Now we have a pretty reasonable pace of streams going out, so that's a lot better. And I'm eager. I'm an eager beaver to play. I played one GT a month ago with Gene Steeler Cole, got first place. I have ATC coming up this weekend. Hopefully that went well by the time this airs. We'll find out. And
From me.
From Blake, yes. No, you're going to find out from you. And then additionally, I basically have no other events on the horizon. I'm going to Nova. But I'm probably going to be commentating for Games Workshop. That remains to be seen. And then I went to Tacoma. That was a blast, really fun event. But again, I commentated for Games Workshop, so I need more events to play. I have some events later lined up in the season, but I'm hungry now.
I'm a little bit upset with you because this is the new format for Art of War, right? But I feel like you just put a big spoiler out there. I was trying to build up to the fact that you won that event, which I was very proud of because Nick has not been playing much 40K competitively. He's been doing a lot of commentating, and he went to probably one of the, since 10th has launched, and you won it. And that's pretty awesome. So we're going to be talking about that. That's also part of part 2. We're going to be talking about some Gene Steeler Cold.
That is what we're talking about, Blake. I feel like that was spoiled in the show itself because, you got to kind of do well to be invited on the show as a guest. And you know what? I couldn't interview myself. So that's why you're here. It all comes together.
Yeah, but what was the GT? What GT was it?
It was, oh man, you put me on the spot. I don't even remember.
I forget the name. I know, but it's one of those things. It was a large GT. I was going
along the Capital City Clash here in Tallahassee, 15 minutes from my house.
How many people were there?
It was 40.
That's a sizable event for the start of the edition. Outside of maybe, Lone Star happened this last weekend, and before that, you did have Tacoma. But outside of those two, you're not seeing these huge events this early.
This event was a couple weeks ago, so actually it was one of the largest events at the time. This was pre-Tacoma, and this was actually pre-balanced FAQ. So, I took Gene Steeler Cult to an army meta full of Wraith Knights and Infinite Fate dice and things of that nature.
That's interesting. So you actually beat some of those lists that were just completely unstoppable at the time. It actually makes it more impressive. So that's a good point of clarification because those Wraith Knight lists were pretty gnarly before some of these rules adjustments. And you had Knights pre-point nerf too, which is not as big of a deal, but still a big deal.
I played against 2 of those Knight players. And I'll be honest, I didn't play against the unnerfed Eldar. I took Gene Steeler Cult planning to play against the unnerfed Eldar because I figured they could, but I didn't get the opportunity because my boy Hogan, who's a War Room member, knocked out 2 Eldar players on the way up, including all the unnerfed Wraith Knights, only to be bested by me in a 4-armed Emperor duel.
Was he playing Gene Steeler Cult as well?
Yeah, he was. We had a Gene Steeler Cult off.
Hogan's a cool dude. Hogan, I give him a shout out on here. Y'all should go watch Hogan play on some stream games. He's a great player. He's down there in Pensacola, right?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, he's a Pensacola boy. Well, Nick, what are your thoughts on kind of the composition that y'all took in? I know we kind of touched on it briefly earlier. You had talked about, there's really 5 armies that are really hot right now. The composition seems to be pretty loaded on 4 or 5 armies up top: the Custos, the Imperial Knights, the Eldar, the what was it, Necrons. You have a lot of things up top. How do you feel like that's going to shake out? Do you feel like there are some dark horses in there that could defeat, like, say someone taking a really strong Eldar list? Do you feel like the GSD is a super strong counter to that? Do you feel like the Custodes could possibly be a sneaky one to beat XYZ? What are your thoughts on why people are taking these compositions?
Well, I think it's Eldar is fairly obviously strong, right? And Custodes has just been putting up some great results. They took down 1st and 2nd at Tacoma. And when you actually put the army on the table, you understand how durable it actually is and how good it is at stealing objectives and just holding them forever and then shooting you and getting up the table. And then the Assassins add so much to it. The Assassins and Exaction Squads. That army also is a great package. Gene Steeler Cults, that's really what we're here to talk about. That's what I'm here to unpack. That's part 2. So stay tuned, everybody. And then The other factions like Knights, there's a lot of variance on Knights. Not every team took Knights to ATC. There's a lot of things like Thousand Suns are great, but you don't have every team running Thousand Suns. And there's definitely room for dark horses. Like Jack is running Grey Knights at ATC. Hopefully, this isn't Jack snowflaking too hard and us having big regret. But on paper, his Grey Knight plans, they seem to be working. Maybe we'll get
Jack's
him on
Grey Knighting.
Jack's Grey Knighting.
Dude, that's actually crazy. I'm excited because Grey Knights have been doing really bad. They've been doing terrible in the meta. I'm excited for that.
You should be excited for that. Your team's got nothing on these Grey Knights.
Dude, Jack always wild cards. He always wild cards. And that's one thing I respect about him. He will show up with the wackiest army that you're like, is that going to be okay? Like when Blood Angels weren't considered very good. Jack showed up with them, I don't.
It's true. He's a really good list builder and obviously a very strong player. And you know what? Jack's the man.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing, I don't know if this is too much of a part 2 question or not, but I'm gonna put it in here. Do you think, this is kind of going back to my original question, and I've looked at it on paper, do you think the GSC are the Eldar killer?
I don't think they're the Eldar killer that like everyone makes them out to be. I think they can win that game where so many factions cannot even win that game. I would even go so far as to say GSC are probably favored into Eldar. But it's like a 55-45, maybe 60-40, but that's getting into like GSC are hard to play against. If you're putting like a great GSC player versus a great Eldar player, one, that's a game I want to watch. But two, I expect it to be bloody and brutal for everybody. It's not clear cut. One faction just beats the other there.
My other question would be: your team has unlimited army choices. You can put out whatever. Someone drops Eldar first drop. What are you putting out?
We got a whole plan for this, Blake, and I'm only going to reveal these top secrets because this whole podcast releases after the show.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. We're going to put out Grey Knights and Gene Stealer Cult, the double attack. That's one of the reasons we brought Grey Knights. So you're getting your secrets here.
That's pretty neat. That's interesting. I'm interested to see that list, and I want to see exactly what it does because that's a really cool thought. And of course, y'all would do that. Of course, y'all would come up with a composition on an army that's considered weak that is going to be a good match into a power, and people are going to choose that. People are going to choose the Grey Knights.
I really hope this is the case, Blake. Otherwise, I'm just going to be so sad.
It's a great gamble. It's a great look. I think it's really cool that y'all did that, and I'm honestly proud. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that 5th choice y'all took.
I'm glad you think so.
Everyone can win with the top factions, or not everyone, but most people would consider all the top teams are like, all right, this is our composition. This is what everyone's running. Y'all take Grey Knights. I respect it. I like it.
I wanted to run Demons, but then the boys were like, no, you got to play GSC.
Are Demons good? You love Demons.
I love Demons. What does it matter?
Yeah, but I mean, are they're solid right now? I mean,
I would say Demons are good. Demons are a strong army. They're a little bit of a stat check because they kind of rely on their monsters to do everything, but they're pretty good at it.
Since this is a little bit of the get the know Nick Nanavati, I mean, most people have listened to several episodes where we've kind of getting to know you. I think I've recorded one with you before, but it's no secret that you love Demons. And so, in fact, I think you had a name for yourself in, what was it, 6th or 7th edition when you ran all of the monster demons and just flew around and created craziness.
It's my flying monster list.
Flying monster list, man. You got the Fate Weaver, your boy Fate Weaver. You got all the big bad demons in there. That's how I know you. That's my thought. When I think of what is Nick playing, it's big bad demons flying around. Or GSC. You're also a GSC player, but
not an Eldar player though.
I do think of it as Eldar too, but not so much. You haven't been playing Eldar much.
That's true. I've kind of let Quentin take them for 10th edition. They're too easy mode.
Yeah, they're easy mode. You've been playing the big. I think as you as the demon GSC. And speaking of GSC, why don't you go ahead and run us through this list before we end this episode? Let's get a feel for the list as we go into part.
All right, let's go through it top to bottom. So this Gene Circle list is a slight variation to what I took to the tournament about a month ago. I made more or less one change, but you'll get the idea. So we've got a lot of characters. So we've got a Biophagus. He has the enhancement for Inscrutable Cunning. That's going to allow him and his unit to infiltrate. And whenever I spend CP on that unit on a 4+, I regen it. Then I've got a Calamivus. He's a little idiot dude. It's 40 points. He's a 12-inch aura of no deep strike. 2 Nexos. Those are other 50-point idiot dudes that basically allow me to use my strats multiple times and for free. That's pretty good.
Now, how does that stack up, Nick? Tell us exactly how that works in 10th edition, because I know there was some controversy on like the free strats and how they're used.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of them are very different from each other. So the one this one works is basically your Nexus is going to join a squad, and you can use strats on that squad for a second time with your Nexus. So I could use my strat like normally and then use it with the Nexus a second time. And that second time that I use it with the Nexus, it's free. So, just awesome.
That's super nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Got 1, 2, 3 Primuses. They're just money. They're 70-point idiot characters. They join to a squad. The squad gets reroll hits. And they let me redeploy 3 units. So it doesn't stack with itself, so I don't get to redeploy 9. I would not need to redeploy 9, but I could. But 3, I get to redeploy 3. And then finally, I have 2 Reductus Saboteurs. One has the Enhancement Meticulous Planner, which is basically like the Vex strat. So I make one of your strats cost 1 more for the rest of the game. These dudes are just 2 55-point lone ops. They have a lot of bombs, so they have a demolition charge. They have a once per game ability that if you get within 12 inches of them, then you can roll 2+, and then you take D3 plus 3 mortals. And of course, they're lone operatives, so you have to get within 12 to just ever damage them. And aside from that, they just like do actions and hold stuff. And then, of course, all Genestealer cults have Deep Strike built in. Then I've got 2 Acolyte hybrid squads. This is really where we're getting to the meat of the list. 2 10-mans, bunch of hand flamers, 4 demo charges. These are the demo bombs. These guys do work. We'll get into it part 2. This is the good stuff. Then I have 4 neophyte units. Same idea. They're 20 guys each, so I have 80 neophytes total. 19 dudes and 1 cult icon guy with a banner. I got 4 guys with seismic cannons, 4 guys with flamers, and a bunch of dudes with just las guns. So that's 80 dudes right there. And then to round it out, I have a unit of 10 aberrants. They're monsters. They're just little infantry dudes that hit super hard with their strength 8, AP 2, and 2 damage attacks. And then they have 4+ feel no pain. And when they're joined to a character, which of course they are, they're -1 to wound. So they're super tough to kill. Then I have 2 Ridge Runners to round it out. They have like these little indirect fire guns. The cool thing about them is after they hit you with a unit with their guns, then my entire army is going to be an additional point of AP and additional damage or additional yours cover against them. That's the whole list.
Dude, that's pretty dirty actually. And I'm pretty terrified as a night player, especially. I'm pretty terrified to go into that. So I feel like it's going to do some real damage in a not only in a team format, but it's shown that it can actually sustain and do well at a big event as well.
Yeah, Genestealer Cult's awesome. I'm super excited to talk about it more.
Oh, for sure. I do want to mention here that in 1 month, in August, on my podcast, Fluffy DOG 40K, we are going to be talking about Genestealer Cult lore. So as I was sitting there listening to you say this, I kind of heard some of the names of some of these units, and I was like, aha, yeah, that's why they're there. That's why they're the acolytes. And Genestealer cults have a really strange lore that I didn't know until I recorded that episode. So go and check it out because I think it's pretty neat.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super exciting.
Nick, it was very nice having you on my show, Art of War Vanilla. I'm very glad you're able to join us today.
Like, I didn't tell you this, but did you know this is the 200th episode of the show?
No way. Are you kidding me?
Not kidding you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy right now. I'm so happy I made 200. Oh, I'm so happy.
That makes my day. Person to have you do this.
Yeah, I'm stoked, man. I'm very stoked for it. But let me go ahead and give one little shout out here to my boy Adam Camilleri. Make sure to check out his show, Art of War Down Under. It's very, very, very Australian, and always check in. We got part 2 of this show. Make sure to go over to the Patreon, subscribe, check out all the great content there. And thanks for having me on, Nick. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Blake, anytime. Thank you for interviewing me.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. You can check out part 2 of this show on AOW40K.com. Your usual show will be back. I'll be your host. You can say bye to Mr. Law, but for right now, he is going to continue this show on in part 2 for our patrons, our subscribers, and he's going to be asking me all that goodness about the Genestealer cult. So if you want to learn how the 4 armed friends operate, how to beat them, how to play them, and what you need to know about them, come join us in part 2. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.